Morning. Morning. Wow, y'all are awake. Well, those of you who don't remember me, I think there's one in here that might remember me. I used to run around Pamunkey Elementary School when I was about yay tall. Charlene remembers it. Brett. But getting to come here today is actually a very cool thing. Last time I was here was March the 3rd for my mom's funeral. It was something that we didn't think was going to go down quite that way, right, Charlie? We thought we'd be maybe burying the other one first, but God does a lot of stuff in our lives that fools us. You know, he says our thoughts aren't his thoughts. He proves it all the time, especially when we're silly enough to try to go around and do things without him. So, before I start, how many people are familiar with the TV show Duck Dynasty? Cool, I'm not going to have to change very much. Because, oddly enough, the people on that show are the reason why I'm still alive. So we're going to play a little music today. We're going to tell a story. We're going to tell a story that when it started, I couldn't have sat down and made it up if I wanted to. But all goes back to when I was very young, that little brat that used to run around Pamunkey Elementary School. I was a stutterer. I stuttered horrible, which caused me a lot of problems as a youth. And you know, back then, the guidance counselors told my parents I wasn't applying myself. Anybody else heard that from the guidance counselor in their life? Oh, yeah. But back then, in the 60s, you were just a brat that wasn't applying himself. You weren't ADHD and given a special title in school and a little human to run around and make sure you didn't get in trouble like they do today. So I was just a little brat that wasn't applying myself. But what I did do was, I was introverted because I stuttered. I would sit in my bedroom with a tape recorder and make up songs. And this went on throughout my school years and actually got me through. And so when I was in my senior year of high school, I lived in Louisville, Texas. Still stuttered. And I saw a TV show on CMT, cable TV show. Ralph Emery was interviewing Mel Tillis. And he stuttered. And I was transfixed. I was like, wow, there's a grown-up that stutters. And he's doing all right. And then he said something that changed my life. He said that he sang because he didn't stutter when he sang. And I never realized that, and I thought to myself, you know what? I don't stutter when I sing either. So I started to take my school books and stuff that I would normally read and stutter, and I would say it. So the next time my history teacher called on me to sing, because he was being mean, to read in class, because they all knew I stuttered, I sang it, a whole paragraph. And he tried to stop me, and I kept going. Because I was so fired up that when I sang, I didn't stutter. And it wasn't long before the singing turned into just talking. And I just stuttered. My parents were not happy about that, because then I talked a lot. But the other bad thing that happened was we didn't really grow up in a spiritual home. And the Steve God was born, because I stuttered. And then being a teenager, and you know, back then you could get into a honky tonk when you were 18 years old, and so I did. And I could talk and sing and dance. That's how I met this guy right down here a few years later. But it started you know, if you were a halfway decent looking guy in Texas that could talk and sing and dance, there was some fun to be had. And that went on for a decade. So we'll fast forward because Pastor Dave says I can only talk till 2 o'clock today, right? But so I'm going to fast forward. But I got married, had a couple little girls, messed that up horribly. Wasn't your fault, but you were there. Owned a bar called Cotton Eye Joe's Saloon in Camp Springs, Maryland. Learned how to play guitar. Met a guy that's friends of ours named Garrett Alden that taught me how to write music. And but after we closed down Cotton Eye Joe's Saloon, after I had accomplished everything that I thought I wanted to accomplish at 32 years old, I decided to just give up. I was going to Nashville a lot. And it won't sound like this today, but back then I did sound pretty much just like Garth Brooks, and it wasn't something they wanted another one of there. So I gave up and I moved to Louisiana and got remarried. And, wasn't there long, I was selling cars. Wasn't there long, and I got invited to go fishing one night with the family of my new bride. And they said, there's not going to be any drinking or anything crazy on this fishing trip, so just to let you know, and I was fine. I had 20 years of barbecue. This was enough for me, and I went, and it was a beautiful night. It was January 23rd, 1997. And I was a little frightened at first because I'd never seen that many people with beards that big. And they all had, there was like this, probably a dozen guys, and all of them had beards, from fairly short to really long. And looked like none of them ever had a haircut before in their life either. So it was a little frightening, but I remember being told that these guys were Christians. It would be okay. So I was sitting on the banks of the Washita River, and one of them walked up and sat down next to me, and he said, "Your name's Conover, right?" I said, "Yeah, they call you by your last name there. If you ever go to West Monroe, Louisiana, or the White Ferry Road Church, they're going to ask you your name, and they're going to call you by your last name all the time today." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, Conover, have you solved your death problem yet?" And I said, I didn't know I had one. So I guess the answer is no. He said, "Well, you're going to die, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah. I try not to think about that too much." And he said, "That must be a horrible existence." I said, "Well, it's not much fun. That's why I don't think about it." But it started a conversation. First time in my life a man had really ever sat down across from me and wanted to tell me the truth because he loved me. He told me so. That was a little scary too, to have a guy looking like that tell you he loved you. On the banks of a river in Louisiana in the middle of the night. But hey, I rolled. So it was a long conversation that night. And what I knew was, if you'd have asked me what I thought about God, he did. And I believed there was a God. I knew the Easter story, the Christmas story. And he said, "What do you think about God?" And I said, "Well, I think God made everything, but I think the rest is pretty much up to us." And he said, "Really? How's that going for you?" I said, "Not good. And then he told me a story. If you're looking at the sticker on my guitar, he told me this story. And he told it without ever opening up the Bible, which for me was really, really important, because if he had pulled a Bible out of the knapsack, I'd have moved on down the beach or walked on water myself. I'd have got out of there pretty quick. But he shared the gospel with me in such a way that, and evidently I was ready for it, because for whatever reason, Paul says, consider this worthy of thinking, that the whole world is sinners and I'm one of the worst. And I can tell you, I wasn't a good friend, I wasn't a good son, I wasn't a good husband, I wasn't a good father, I wasn't a good anything. So, Jace, towards the end, before the sun was rising, got to the crux of the matter, and said, well, answer me this. If your life was a public company, and you were the CEO and the board of directors had a meeting right now, would they keep you on or would they fire you? And I said, they would fire me really, really quickly. He said, well, why don't we see if we can do that? And I said, well, who are we going to put in charge? And he told me the rest of the story. So, first song I'm going to sing for you is, we had a long talk about faith and what faith was. And Jace talked to me about the faith of the apostles while Jesus was on the cross. And we talked about how the apostles were nowhere to be found when Jesus was on the cross. And they all said he was God. They all said he was the Messiah. They all believed the prophecies. They saw the miracles. But when he was on the cross, they were nowhere to be found. Yet, just a few years later, the same apostles, minus Judas, chose to suffer death instead of denying that they saw something. So he shared with, because that was one of my things, one of the things that I brought up when we were talking on that riverbank was I didn't want to be, if I was going to be a Christian, I didn't want to be the Christian that showed up at the church building on Sunday morning and left and did whatever he wanted to do. And Jace convinced me otherwise. He said it is finished. As Mary cried, the sun was dark and refused to shine, and 12 apostles nowhere to be found. As Jesus' blood fell to the ground, please don't stop at the foot of the cross. Don't run away, fear worldly love. Just climb right up, get the blood he gave, and then be buried in his water grave. And God will raise you to life anew. He will seal you with his Spirit too. And he will guide you each step of the way. Please don't stop at the foot of the cross. He was buried in Joseph's tomb, a Roman guard still watch there too. In just 3 days, that ground quaked. God raised him up from man
Shared with me. It's the first time I ever heard it. Shocking, 32 years old. And it still tears me up today. If you had told me right then and there that 18 years later I would be traveling all over the planet telling the story, I would have probably had a myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack, and died right then and there. Because before that moment, before God chose to grant me repentance, because trust me, it doesn't come any other way. I would have, if I had died, I'd have been, you know this. We'll tell you some stories. I'd have been a tour guide in hell. God would have seen, Satan would have seen me coming and said, Connor, come to the front line and take over. Because I wasn't a good anything before that. So the fact that God chose to do that is, first of all, not only proof there's a God, proof that anybody can come to know Jesus Christ if they hear the gospel. And Satan's number one job is to keep people from telling his story that's in these symbols, and that's why it's all over everything I own. Everywhere I go, you're going to know this story. But I was still, God granted me repentance, and I was like, Jason, still, I've just seen too many Christians that I didn't like very much. And I said, so what? Jesus is at the right hand of God mediating for us. If we put our faith in that, we can just go on sinning. That doesn't sound like much of a thing to do. And he laughed. He said, you're making this too easy. Because that's what they said to Paul in Romans 6. And he said, no, Steve. He said, don't you know you're going to have to die? I said, I thought we were just going to fire him. And now we're going to die in here. He goes, yeah, you're going to die. He said, the one that you made. He said, he's got to go. So they said the same thing to Paul. They said, why don't we just, if that's the case, let's just keep on sinning so grace will increase, right? And Paul said, by no means don't you know. You will know the truth. When you hear the message. Don't you know that for those of you who were baptized into Christ, were baptized into his death, buried with him, in order that God could raise you to a new life. Amen. And I said, now we're talking. Because, I said, that's what I'm talking about, right there. Yeah. That sounds good to me. He goes, and you get to participate in the resurrection. I went, time. What? He goes, yeah. When Jesus comes back, those who are in him will be raised and get a new, eternal, glorified body, just like him. And he said, the cool part, here's what we know. We know from Jesus, after he was raised from the dead, he showed up, walked through a wall, showed up in front of the apostles. We felt his scars. He had a body. And then he wanted to have a fish fry. So we're going to have fish fries in heaven. I said, wow. I said, so we're going to, those in Christ are going to be resurrected. I said, why have I never heard that? He said, it's why they killed the apostles, because they wouldn't deny the resurrection. He said, Satan wants to drag everybody to the foot of the cross. Satan wants you to beg Jesus to come down off the cross and follow you around your whole life. And as long as you don't giving me the resurrection, it's going to be all right. He said, start telling people about the resurrection. What happened? So I said, I'm in. He said, well, go on home and study. But I said, no, I'm not going to sleep. Are you kidding me? I said, you're baptizing me right now. He said, it's January. That river's about 48 degrees. I said, so. He said, it's bad for you because it's 48 degrees. I've got chest waders. Oh. So I'll go get the chest waders on. And we walked out in that river, and for whatever reason, I wasn't cold. I didn't care. I just didn't care. I was cold all the way home because I didn't think about this part, Because he said, we can get in a boat. The church is like a mile away, and the baptistry's heated. I said, no, we could die on the way, right? I said, no, right now. That's right. Yeah. So we did it. And I look back on that moment, and I'm so glad I had it. I'm so glad I had the moment where I know that the guy you knew that Cotton Eye Joe's is dead. He's gone. It's been gone. Long dead. I'm so happy. And that's when it gets good. And I'm on my, see, I told you, this whole thing, if I do this whole thing with music, it's like 3 hours. And he said I can do that. So that's where the story gets good. And then I said, but I'm still not going into a church. I was allergic to church buildings. And he said, well, that's all right, because we have house churches. And you can just go down to Phil and Kay's house. Those of you who watch the show know they call mom and dad by their names. And the reason for that, when we eat cake, I'll answer all that. They got tired of saying mommy and daddy in church about their mom and dad, so they started calling them Phil and Kay. You can go down to Phil and Kay's house, a house church, until you get comfortable enough to come to church. I told him I didn't have any clothes. He said, look at me. This is what we wear to the church. I said, well, that's good. So I started going to house church. And it was awesome. I sat in front of Phil and Kay and Uncle Si, a bunch of the other guys, John Godwin, got loved on. And it's a good thing because less than a month after I became a Christian, my wife decided to live an alternative lifestyle, and we got a house with my son, my 3-year-old son. And that's why I can tell you, without that, but they loved me, kept me accountable. And it wasn't long after that where I was going to the church building. But one night Phil says to me, he said, Connor, he said, Jason tells me you're a songwriter. And he goes, we make these duck hunt DVDs. Back then they were just the little things. And we make these duck hunt DVDs, and we buy this really bad music from Nashville and pay too much money for it. If you could write us a couple songs, who knows what might happen? And my first thought to myself was, how awesome. Here I was trying to be the next Garth Brooks. Now we get to write music for a duck hunt DVD. That's just the coolest thing ever. So I said, Phil, I've never been duck hunting. So he goes, well, we can fix that. So they did. And I'll never forget this. Sitting in the blind with them. The sun is just creeping up over the swamp. And Phil prays. And I look up, I'm drinking this really dark coffee, community coffee. And I remember looking up, I could hear the birds, I could hear the squirrels rustling through the trees behind me. And it was almost like I was seeing the first sunrise I'd ever seen in my life. And God just dropped the first song in my brain, which is what he does. I'm obviously not a guitar player. So he just drops them in my brain. And I have to write them down, and then our friend here makes them sound great. So I'll play the first one. This one has been heard by millions of people all around the world. It's been in several DVDs. I hope you like it. Blackwater, corner and cries,
it just literally popped into my head, and I looked down at him and I said, Phil, I got the first song. He's like, what? He goes, I just prayed and you got the first song? I said, yeah. He said, you're weird. I said, all I can tell you is that's how they show up. Usually I'm driving, but this is the first Duck Blind song that's ever showed up. So he said, write another one. I did. It's called Duck Doctor. I won't bore you with that one. And they put it on Duckman 4 straight powder DVD. And I never thought twice about it. It was cool doing the songs. I loved being in the studio. So they released the DVD, and a few months after they released it, I see him at the church building, and he says, Tom, come over here. He goes, man, the phones are ringing off the line. I said, really? He said, why? He said, they like your music. I was like, really? He said, yeah. He said, we got a call from a guy that wanted to know if it was okay if we played the life of a duck man at his father's funeral. I said, that's a little weird, but that's awesome. And it hit me. I said, did this really be it? Did this really be what I'm supposed to do? Holy cow. Surely not. Surely. So, and for expediency's sake, I'm going to fast forward some more. But I did a whole CD. It was called Duck Fever. And they sold about 100,000. I said, wow. I said, the average guy that signs a record deal in Nashville doesn't sell 10,000 CDs ever in his career. He sold 100,000 plus CDs of Duck Fever. Whatever, Lord. So then I moved back to Virginia from Louisiana in 2003. And Mom and Dad's health was starting to fail, and I wanted to be back up here. And my ex was making it really hard for me to see my son. So something told me that I needed to be up here. And my partner from Cotton Eye Joe's was running a place called Nicky's in Alexandria, Old Town Alexandria. Now it's called Nick's. And Duncan. And Duncan said, can you come help me? Because we have this military crowd in our dorm, and you don't know how to do military. So I said, sure, I'll come help. And first week I was in there, it was early, and they were doing country line dance lessons. And walks this really tall, pretty brunette girl. Duncan saw her and went, oh no. And her name was Tammy, and we've been married for 11 years. Yeah. But I was doing my best Moses impersonation and wandering and not following what God had given me to do. I don't know if y'all have ever run from that, but that's what I was doing. That's why I moved. I didn't know it at the time. But it's neat how he'll give you assignments to pull you back in. And Tammy was raised in a small church that split up right before she went to college and saw some ugly stuff and got to the University of Delaware and got into it. She's got a master's in counseling, which is really good for me. Got an in-house counselor. But, when you learn about that stuff at a major college, you don't hear much about Jesus. And she was out there questioning God herself. And for whatever reason, we crossed paths, and she said the same thing to me that I said to Jace, and she's like, you're not like all these people. She bought me tickets to a Bill Gaither event for my first birthday when we were together. And we were sitting there, and Guy Penrod was singing, I bow on my knees and cry holy. And I looked over at her, and she was crying so hard that I closed her eyes. And I said, well, there you have it. And then in 2008, I get a call from Willie Robertson, the new CEO of Duck Commander. I said, that's not good. You're the CEO. I knew her. Yeah. So I said, okay. He goes, can you do another CD? We need one. We need some more music. We've already used your other music on everything we do, so we need some new music. And we sell a lot of your stuff. So I said, sure. So I did another one. And God kind of set my new course again. It's like He's saying, I want you to do this. So I did. I played a little bit of this one too. This is on everything I do. You'll find a common theme running through it. I have a CD that's coming out this summer that's all gospel arrangement, but this was on the Duck Fever 2 CD. Lately, people ask me crazy questions. Like, why exactly do I hunt? Why endure that nasty weather? Spend all that time alone. Sit there freezing in the wind and rain. Shake their heads, say, buddy, you must be the same. I know it might look a little crazy, but without it, that's exactly where I'd be. It's the only place I get a break from this so-called reality. Time to think about what matters, things like eternity, things between the man and me. I got more to do. I got to cut that short. So that one was also really popular, and some other duck hunting songs that were on that CD. And he redirected my course. Then in 2010, I was invited to go to Baltimore at a hunting expo and sing a few songs. And the guy that was supposed to come and preach, it was a Christian ministries, outdoor ministries are popping up all over the country. I think God's doing something really powerful. He said, cast your net on the other side of the boat, and people are starting to do that. Yeah. And so I went to one of these events, and I was just supposed to sing a few songs, and then there was a preacher, and he didn't show up. So I sang a few songs, and my buddy John Akers said, tell your story. I said, really? You're going to do that to me? Just throw me under the bus. So I told the story, and 3 guys walked out and wanted me to baptize them right there and there. Wow. Okie doke. I guess we're really doing this thing, aren't we? So I'll tell you real briefly about something else. So it wasn't long after that, and Tammy, I'm physically not able to have any more children, and I took care of that because my ex-wife was sick, junior, she was pregnant. So she knew I couldn't have children. She said, have you ever thought about adopting? And I said, no. At the time, I was like 48 years old. I thought I was done with the little ones. And she goes, this is wives are awesome with this, guys. She goes, well, you're always talking about James 1:27 and how we're supposed to take care of widows and orphans. Yeah. I do say that all the time, and the church should be the church, and there shouldn't be all these foster children out there living in group homes, because we have Christians with empty bedrooms. She said, don't you say that all the time? And I said, yeah, I say it all the time. She goes, well, they're having an informational meeting down at the church about foster care, so it means you're going, right? I said, yeah, it means I'm going. So we did it, and now we have 3 foster children. 4, 5, and 6 years old that all have PTSD. have suffered abuse, and we're in therapeutic foster family now, and it's the best thing that's ever happened. And God does things, not only to redirect you, but He will also get all the impurities out of your life if you'll say yes. I was forced to say yes. I had a counselor for a wife. But I still say yes. She says I can't take credit for it, but I am. So there we have it. It is lunchtime, and there's one more song. So, like I said in the beginning, I could never see myself doing this in teenagers. I wanted to be Garth Brooks. I wanted to be running around on big stages and having girls screaming for me and all this stuff. I didn't want to be standing on the stage talking about these symbols and telling people they needed to die. But yeah, deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow Jesus. It's not what I want to do. But I wouldn't have it. I wouldn't. God is so blessed my life simply because I carry these symbols around me. And play the music that, frankly, He gives me. I'm just talented enough to write it down. That's all the talent I have, guys. Trust me. No musical training. It's just I'm able to know enough chords and carry a tune, kind of, and come up with a decent melody. So I leave you with this. And I think this says it better than any words that I've said so far. And I hope that if anybody here needs to die, that we do it today. Get that out of the way and start following Jesus and be blessed. Was my third year with you, and finally went back home. Saw all the guys who used to act a fool. We started telling stories about all of those old times. Drinking, lying, stealing, we were cool. They said, what in the world happened to you? We sure miss that guy. Tell us the truth. That old man, the one I made, he's buried in a watery grave in the Washington River many years ago. Yeah, he might have been a real fun guy, but in the eyes of God he died that night. Jesus saved my soul. Yeah, he's a bearded man, told me the truth, but I gave my life to Jesus. He raised me up brand new, and that's the truth. That's the truth. Told Mom that I still stumble, I still fall. I get down on my knees and thank Him every night for that sacrifice. And I'm so glad that He is the one that's done this, because trust me, it hasn't been any of me. You know, Revelation 12:11 says, they will overcome him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. Trust me when I tell you this, Satan wants to do one thing, is to stop you from telling your testimony about what Jesus has done in your life. And he gives you every roadblock and every excuse, but don't do it. Just remember these things. Let me pray for everybody real quick. Heavenly Father, Lord, thank you so much for this day. Lord, thank you that you created the universe through Jesus, and a place where we could all come to know you. We don't know why you choose us, Lord. Just thank you so much. Thank you for the death, burial, and the resurrection of your Son. Thank you for the hope we have in that. Help us, Father, to hold on to that. As Paul says, it's a matter of first importance. And that we take it with us everywhere we go. Father, if there's anybody here that needs to respond to that message, let him or her come to see Pastor Dave and take care of that today, Father. Thank you for everything you give us, Lord, especially the birthday cake from my birthday month. We thank you for all the blessings we have. His wonderful name. Thanks for having me, guys. Let's go eat some cake.